Hello and welcome to this media tutorial for first-time editors. Today we're going to be going through the program Adobe Premiere Pro, and we'll be looking at the building blocks that are going to assist you on your first edit. We will be covering starting a new project, looking at the user interface, importing media, using the program's base toolset, and exporting our media. Okay, so let's open up our first project in Premiere Pro. So you're presented with this splash page. This may take a little while, especially on your first opening of the program. So we're presented with opening Premiere for the first time, and we've got two ways that we can make a new project. Create New Project button, the blue one, or the black and white New Project. If we were looking for something we'd already started, we could use the Open Project button. But let's just hit this blue one, Create New Project, and we're then presented with this new window. And the main thing we're going to do is we're going to name our project. So we can call this whatever we wish, whatever fits the project. And then it's going to ask us for a location, somewhere to save the work. Where is our work going to be saved to? So by default, it goes to the Adobe Premiere Pro folder on the computer that you're using. You can see from the drop down that there's limited places to save, but we're going to hit that Browse button and we're going to go and find an external hard drive to use. And I do recommend that you use an external hard drive with all your footage on, that you save your projects to, and keep everything in one place, but also look at making a backup of that work as well, especially the footage. Wouldn't want to lose anything. So I've just made a new folder to save my work into. Again, that could be named anything, and it's just for housekeeping, staying neat and tidy. So with that done, everything else now is default. There's a couple of different options here, different tabs to look through. This one here, Renderer. We want to use this one that's got the word metal in brackets and then recommended after it. That's the best one that we can use. Uses the computer in the best way, the memory. And then here we've got different options: time code for video display, audio samples for audio display format, and underneath capture, a few options here: DV and HDV, and whatever other capture hardware you might have on the computer you're using. But by default we can just leave all of those as we found them. In this Scratch Disks tab, everything should already be set to same as project, and there's no real reason for us to change those at the moment. And in ingest settings, we've got some slightly more complicated ways of working that we don't need to worry about right now. But as long as we've got it named and the location chosen, and we have that renderer correct, then we can hit OK and open the program for the first time. So we've got quite a lot going on, lots of different windows. And over here on the left, we've got quite a few tutorials that we can go through in this Learn window. These are really good, and I do recommend you taking a look at those. At the top here, we've got these workspaces, and at the minute we're in the Learning workspace, and that's why the Learn window is present. We've also got Assembly, Editing, Color, Effects, Audio, Graphics, and Libraries. These are all different workspaces, and the windows that we can see below at the moment will change depending on what we choose. So if we choose Editing, you can see that that Learn window has disappeared, and we're left with the main windows that we'll be using for editing in every project. So let's look at the user interface of Premiere Pro. Here we've got our source monitor on the upper left. You can tell that that one's active at the moment because it has the blue line around it. And every time we bring footage into review, we'll be bringing it into the source monitor. On the top right hand side, we've got the program monitor. This is where we'll be viewing our edit as we put it together. Down here, this is the timeline window, the sequence window, and this is where we will be building our edit and doing the majority of the work during our editing. Again, you can see that each box highlights blue as I click into it. This is our tools menu, and we've got a variety of different tools that we can use whilst editing. We'll mainly be sticking with this selection tool, V on the keyboard as the shortcut. And then this is our project window, and this is where all of our footage is going to sit. And you can see that there's a variety of tabs at the top of this project window. For now, we will be mainly focusing on the project tab and the media browser. So let's take a look at the media browser tab in the project window in the bottom left hand of our workspace. So here we can see all of the drives that are connected to the computer, and we're just going to go into our external hard drive that's got our footage on. I'm going to go and choose the folder that's housing the footage that we're going to use today. So this short film footage, and here straight away we can see all of our clips and any subfolders that sit inside of our main folder. We've got a couple of ways of looking at those. We've got our thumbnail view that we're in now, and you can see when I drag across them that those play. And then we've got a list view here that gives us a text-based overview of all of our clips. I like to stay in the thumbnail view, and here we can drag the scale of those thumbnails up and down. And once again you can see that as I move my mouse across them I can actually review the footage inside the thumbnail view. Just going to bring that back down because when they're a little bit too big they're a little bit too difficult to manage. So we're just going to go into that start folder, that subfolder there, and we're going to look at the footage inside of there because that's what we're going to be using for the majority of this demonstration. These are going to make up the beginning of the short film that we're going to work on, and it's a short narrative film, so you can see that as I hover my mouse over the thumbnail I'm able to view it. We want to view it in our source monitor just above, and we can do that in a couple of different ways. We can grab the footage by holding down the mouse and dragging it into the source monitor window, or we can double click and it'll bring the footage in. It's the same result, but with most editing software there's different ways of doing the same action. We're in our source window, and we can see that because it's highlighted blue, and what we'll do now is we'll just take a look at some of the information that we can see in that source window. So over here we've got the time code of this piece of video, hours, minutes, seconds and frames of video. This drop down allows us to decrease or increase the field of view that we have. I would suggest mainly leaving this on fit so that we can have it as full screen in our source monitor as possible. Over here we've got the playback resolution. If our computer's not very powerful and it's struggling to play back the footage nicely, then we can click into this menu and choose to review it at a half or quarter resolution. Over here we've got the duration of the shot. So again in hours, seconds, minutes and frames, so it's 0 hours, 1 minute, 41 seconds and 14 frames long. So at the bottom of our source monitor we've got our timeline. So this blue marker here, this is the playhead. This is the frame that we're on at the moment, so we're on the first frame. And we can drag through this and review the footage. We're not playing the footage right now, we're just dragging through and seeing what's inside this shot and what's going to be usable in our edit. So we've got a number of tools at the bottom of the source monitor, just underneath that timeline. And our main one here is going to be the play and stop control on the user interface. So hitting play will play our clip forward and hitting stop will stop it. We've got our step forward and step back a frame. And by clicking those we can move forward in time or back in time, frame by frame. That allows us to be very precise. We're also able to use our keyboard to control playback, as well as lots of other functions inside of the program. More acclimatized you become to using the keyboard and its shortcuts, the better an editor you will become. Hitting spacebar on the keyboard will play our clip forwards, and hitting it again will stop. We're also able to use the J, K and L buttons on our keyboard to control the playback of the clip. Hitting L will make our clip play forwards, K will stop it, J will have the clip play backwards. These buttons are called the shuttle controls, because what we're also able to do is press L once for normal speed playback, again for double speed, again for 4 times, and again for 8 times speed. We're also able to do that with the J button to go back, so we can shuttle back by hitting J once, twice for 2 times speed, 3 times for 4 times speed, and a 4th time for 8 times speed. So at the moment we're reviewing our footage, but we haven't actually brought any of our footage into our project yet. So let's do that. So inside of our media browser, we're able to view and review our footage. So I want to select everything in this folder. So I could either draw a lasso around it, or I could use Command and A on the keyboard if we're using a Macintosh, and then right click with the mouse and select Import. Quite quickly, it will appear in our project window. And you can see that we've moved away from the Media Browser tab and into our Project tab. Our footage is imported and we're able to start editing with it now. So now that we've got our first shot in the source browser, we can review the footage and start to make some edit decisions on how we're going to bring it into our edit and onto our timeline. So I'm just going to play through the shot. I'm going to find the point where I want my clip to begin. So I'm just going to pause it there. My blue timeline playhead is where I want my clip to begin. So I'm going to choose Mark In from this tool inside the source monitor. And it looks like a little bracket. It's also represented by I on the keyboard. When I hit that Mark In button, the rest of the timeline in the source monitor highlights in that light grey. I can now play forward to where I want the clip to end, and I can hit the Mark Out button, or O on the keyboard. The grey highlighted section between the Mark In and Mark Out symbols is the amount of footage that we're going to bring into our timeline, and is going to be the first shot of our edit. With this being our first shot, we're going to drag it from the source monitor down onto our timeline. Our mouse changes from our regular black arrow to now a little white clenched fist with a plus next to it. When we let go with the mouse, we've placed our first clip onto the timeline. The timeline now springs to life. It's got a lot more information in it than it did before. We can see timeline information at the top. This is measuring our edit's duration. We can see the clip that we've placed on there. Our video track, V1, and our audio track, A1, as well as other video and audio tracks that we're not using right now. As soon as we brought our clip from our source monitor onto our timeline, it's now represented in the program window. And we can control the timeline indicator here, much in the same way that we did in the source monitor. You can also see that when I drag the timeline indicator here, it moves in the program window, and vice versa. This is because the program window is a direct representation of what is happening in our timeline. We've got the same kind of play controls here as well. Start and stop, step back a frame, step forward a frame. We're also able to control our timeline in the same way that we did with the keyboard. Spacebar to play and to stop. And we can use our J, K and L functions as well to shuttle through our program. The mark in and mark out points that we used to make our edit decisions are not set in stone. we're able to move and adjust those quite easily. Simply by grabbing a hold of the in point or the out point using the mouse, we're able to reset those and put those to new positions and create new durations. We're also able to move our timeline indicator, our playhead, to a different position and choose a new out point. If we want to remove the in point and out point completely, then we can right click in the source monitor's timeline and choose clear in and out. From there we can then choose new mark in and out points so that we can use another part of this clip. So at present we only have one clip on our timeline. We haven't actually done any editing yet. So let's choose a new clip by double clicking it so it appears in our source monitor and using our playhead to find where we want to put our next in point. So I'm going to choose a section just where the action begins. Put my in point in using I on the keyboard. Play forward to review the action. Spacebar on the keyboard to stop. And then I've put a new out point in using O on the keyboard. So I'm now marked in and out in my source monitor. Coming down to my timeline, it's time to decide where that new clip is going to sit. So I'm going to bring my timeline indicator, that blue line, to the end of my first clip. Now I want to put it in the right place. So I don't just want to park my timeline indicator anywhere, I want it to sit on the last frame of my previous shot. If I hold Shift down on the keyboard while I drag my timeline indicator, it sticks to the end of that clip. And when it does, these white triangles appear at the end of the clip. That's letting me know that I am in the right place. I'm stuck to the end of that shot, and moving the mouse now doesn't allow me to come away as long as I'm holding Shift down. So now with my in and out points selected on my new clip, and my timeline indicator sitting in the right place at the end of my first clip on my timeline, I'm able to bring the next shot in. You are able to drag the shot from the source monitor onto the timeline again, but we're going to do this in a method called 3-point editing. So the in and the out point in your source monitor make your first 2 points, and the timeline indicator creates your third point for 3-point editing. So to bring the next shot in, we're going to use one of these two symbols here, overwrite or insert. And for now, we're going to use this overwrite, which is also full stop on the keyboard. So with everything in place, I click on the override button, and that brings our second shot onto the timeline. So we'll just play from our first shot into our second shot. While we're here, let's just take a moment to look at this slider tool. So dragging this along at the bottom of the timeline, we're able to move along our edit and view different sections of it. If I grab one end of the slider tool and pull it out, then I begin to zoom out of the edit. I'm not affecting the duration of my editing at all. The length of my film is not changing. I'm just zooming in on those clips to get a better look at them. We've also got some sliders and magnifiers on this right hand side of the timeline. When I grab one end of the slider and move it down, you can see that we've zoomed in on the video layer. And the video layer is actually now presenting the thumbnails, the first frames of those clips. And it just makes it a little bit easier for us to work out what shot is what on the timeline. I can do the same with the audio layers. And when we zoom in there, we can see the audio waveforms. So let's bring our next shot onto the timeline. In the source monitor, I'm using the same clip that we used for our first shot on our timeline, and we're going to use it again. I'm going to mark in just before this character walks in, and then mark out just after his first line. I'm going to bring my timeline indicator in my timeline to the end of the last shot, holding down Shift so that it snaps in place, and then I'm going to hit Override on the source monitor. I could also use full stop on the keyboard. Let's do that again. Let's grab the next shot. I'm going to go and find the section of the clip that I want. So that's the end of the line that I want, so I'm just going to mark out. I can do it here, or O on the keyboard. Bring it back to just before he delivers his line. Mark in. Make sure my timeline indicator's in the right place. And override. So in this instance, I use the keyboard shortcut full stop. I select the next shot that I want to use, making sure it's on the frame that I want. Mark in, I on the keyboard, let that line play out.
Probably ask her.
Mark out on the keyboard with O. Set up my timeline indicator and hit full stop to overwrite it onto the timeline. So what we're doing right now is we're creating what we call an assembly or a vomit pass or a rough cut. We're just getting our shots in the right order on the timeline, one after another. Mark in, mark out, override onto the timeline, and just build that timeline up. I can't stress how important it is to get the story or to get the video content on the timeline roughly, get it in the right order, and then we'll come back and finesse it later. Premiere Pro and other editing programs will have an auto save feature that may save your work every 5, 10 or 15 minutes depending on how you set it. But I recommend that you do not rely on this and that you save often. For me, after most edit decisions that I make and put on the timeline, I will then save. And we can do that by simply going to File in the top menu and choosing Save, and Premiere will quickly save for us. And the shortcut for that on the Mac is Command and S. Every few minutes and every few edit changes that I make, I will make a save. Save often and avoid disappointment. Adobe Premiere Pro and other editing programs are known as NLEs, non-linear editors. This means that we're able to go back into our edit and make changes. For example, right now I don't like the way that I'm introducing these characters.
She's crying. Why is she crying?
The character of John in the cardigan,
Probably ask her.
and the character of his subconscious in the suit. Right now I've got two shots that introduce them, but I really want to get the idea across that they're the same person and that they're sitting next to each other. Although the editing I've done so far is technically correct and usable, I want to make a change. So I'm going to highlight the two shots that I'm not happy with. I can just click on one and then shift click the next one, or I can draw a lasso or box around them both, and with them highlighted I can hit delete and they're gone from the edit. They still exist in my project window and I can bring them in again, but from the edit work I've removed them. I'm just going to lasso everything downstream of my edit, everything to the right, and move it down just out of my way for a moment. Bring my timeline indicator to the end of this shot, and then choose to use this two shot of the two characters sat next to each other with the same lines as we had before.
She's crying. Why is she crying? Maybe ask her that?
So I'm going to mark in and out on that shot. My timeline indicator is in the right place. And I hit override. I can now close this gap by highlighting all of the clips that follow it and drag them into position to close the gap. Or I can highlight the gap itself, hit delete on the keyboard, and everything snaps back into position. The action and the dialogue play out again, but now in a slightly different way. Let's take a look at another way of putting our footage onto our timeline. So far we've concentrated and only used the override option for putting our footage onto our timeline. And for the most part, especially when we're putting our assembly edit together, that works just fine. But what about in a scenario where we want to put a piece of footage in between two existing clips at an earlier part of our edit? If we choose to bring in a new clip, for this example, I'd like to bring a clip in between two existing shots on our timeline, very early on in our story. If I choose Override, the new shot that I've brought in has pasted over the top of our edit, essentially destroying the original edit work and causing all kinds of problems. We'll just undo that one. And so how to bring in a shot that we want to fit in between two existing edit points. And so how do we bring in a new shot in between two existing clips on our timeline? So instead of using overwrite, we're going to use insert. And if we look at the symbols, overwrite shows a clip being put on top of existing clips, and insert shows a new clip being pushed in between two existing clips. So when we use insert, comma on the keyboard, we push our shot in between the existing two, and it pushes the rest of our edit downstream, and the new shot snugly fits in to where we wanted it. So now with our assembly edit largely in place, we can start looking at finessing some of the shots. And we do that through trimming our shots. We're going to stay in our selection tool. No need to change tools at the moment. You can see that when I move my mouse, my selection tool, over a cut point on the timeline, my mouse changes from the black arrow to this red bracketed arrow. And depending on which side of the cut line I'm on, the arrow changes direction. If I'm at the head of a clip, then the arrow will point to the right, and if I'm at the tail of a clip, then the arrow will point to the left, telling me which direction I can trim. So using my mouse, I'm going to click into the cut, which is now highlighted red, and then drag the shot to the right, trimming the beginning off of it. When I let go of the mouse, the clip is now trimmed and has a new duration and a new start point at the head of the clip. Let me just undo that, Command Z, and we'll watch what happens in the program monitor. As I start trimming, I've now got two screens inside of my program monitor. The left-hand side is the last frame of the clip that I'm not trimming, and on the right-hand side of these two monitors is the shot that I'm manipulating. And when I let go of the mouse, the trim has taken place, and I've cut off any unwanted footage from the beginning of that shot. But we are left with a problem. We've now got a big black hole in between our two shots where we've done the trim. So we've got a couple of options. We can highlight everything downstream of our edit and bring it back to the left to meet with our first shot and close the gap. Or we can highlight the gap itself, hit delete, and everything will close up. Do be careful when you're closing up your gaps not to leave any black frames behind, or you might end up having black flash frames in your edit. Do check through your work, and if you find any gaps, make sure you close them up, or you will see those black frames in your edit work. So we've looked at using the trim tool on our timeline by bringing our mouse down onto our cut points and using that red trim tool to perform a trim. And when we do, we get the two windows in the program monitor, and we let go. We make that gap that needs to be covered up, and we either grab everything and close up the gap, or we highlight the gap and delete it, closing it up and continuing our film. Let me just undo everything there, so Command and Z. So all of our trimming has been undone. And let's look at another way of doing this, because performing the trim this way puts a few steps in that we could make more efficient. by removing the step of having to close up the gap. So let's come over to our tool palette and let's look at this tool here, Ripple Edit Tool, or B on the keyboard. So let's highlight that one. Let's go back over to where we want to make our trim, and it's going to hover over the trim point, and you'll see that the red trim tool that we've used so far is now yellow. So what is this denoting? Well, what's going to happen is we're not going to leave a gap when we make our trim using this tool. I'm going to click into the cut. You can see that's highlighted yellow now instead of red. And when I use the mouse, I'm performing the trim in exactly the same way. I've got my two program monitors. I'm looking for where I want to trim to, but this time when I let go of the mouse, the rest of the edit snaps back to where I've made the trim. There's no gap for me to close. It's done for me, and I can move on to either my next trim or my next edit decision. There are times when you'll have to decide whether using the red or the yellow trim tool is the best tool for the job. So now let's look at an editing method called matching on action or cutting on action. In these examples you can see that at the point of the cut, the same action is being followed through from shot A to shot B, whether it's a kick, a punch, or moving through a doorway. What we're going to do now is going to pay particular attention to the cut here from one shot to the next. And we're going to pay attention to the character in the cardigan, John, moving his head. We're going to use our Ripple Edit tool, B on the keyboard. We can see that yellow trim tool now. And on that first shot, we're going to take the tail end, the end of that shot A, and we're going to take it back to where John's turning his head, and we're going to put it just here, halfway through the turn. Then on the next shot, shot B, still using the yellow trim tool, we're going to trim that shot so that we've also got the John character halfway through that turn of his head. And now, when we watch that back, the cut happens during the action, and we've matched on action from the first to the second shot. This helps to hide the cut, and hiding the cut is the main job of any editor. To take your audience's attention away from the fact that they're watching pictures being cut together, and to be engrossed in the content and the story that you're trying to tell. Let's now look at another cut point in our edit.
Curve that?
What we have here is what we call double action, or a continuity error. Here we can see the character of John turning his head twice in our edit. So we're going to use our yellow trim tool again. We're going to trim the end of shot A and the beginning of shot B, and we're going to get it so that once again the cut happens as this character is turning his head. And this should aid in hiding that cut. Let me show you another tool. If we go to our Ripple Edit tool in our Tools menu, and we hold down on the mouse, we get a little contextual menu pop up with some more tools inside of it. And we're going to choose Rolling Edit Tool, or N on the keyboard. You can see that once again our mouse has changed, our cursor, and it is now this four-arrowed red tool. When I click into the cut point, specifically after I've already done my trimming to match on action, you can now see that those two shots are synchronized with each other, and we can decide exactly where the cut point is going to be while still matching on action. Okay, so we've come to the end of our edit. It's looking great, and we now want to export it so that we can upload it to YouTube or Vimeo or hand it in for submission. So let's do that right now. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to mark in and out on the timeline. So at the beginning of my timeline, I'm going to hit I on the keyboard, and at the end of my program I'm going to hold down Shift and snap to the end of my timeline, the end of my film of my video product, and I'm going to mark out. So I could hit O on the keyboard, or I can use the in and out marks on the program monitor as well. With that done, we can export. So I'm going to go to the top of the screen and choose File, Export, and Media. And we can see here that the shortcut on a Macintosh is Command and M. Clicking on that opens this window, and we're presented with a lot of options. So we've got a preview window here, and if we grab the timeline indicator at the bottom of that preview window, in the bottom of this blue bar, we can cycle through our edit, and then we can actually affect the mark in and out points inside of the export window. So these triangles here can be grabbed, moved and manipulated, and everything in the blue region will be exported and everything else won't be. But we've already set in and out points deliberately in our timeline, so this is everything that we want to export. We've got our timecode information here, and as we drag through, we can see our timecode changing. So we're at 22 seconds and 9 frames. And we've got our overall duration here, 45 seconds and 10 frames. Let's move over to this side of the export window and the export settings, and this is where we're going to make our decisions here. So we'll come back to this part in a moment. So we've got a few options. Match sequence settings. This one is usually not ticked. It's only if we want to mirror the footage that we edited with exactly that we would choose this match sequence settings. It's not always necessary, and we'll leave it unchecked for now. Format and preset. Format first. Format is the type of file that we're going to make. At the moment, it's a QuickTime file, a .mov file, and we've got lots of different codecs to choose from here. Each one of these codecs has a different quality to it, and when exporting, we're trying to balance quality with file size. So QuickTime will usually give us a good quality, and then the preset, we start looking at the compression of the video, and that's going to dictate our file size. It will also affect the overall quality. So in our presets, we're going from lowest compression to highest compression. So small file size, but heavily compressed, and that's going to affect the quality of our visuals. The happy medium in the QuickTime presets, especially for internet broadcast, YouTube, Vimeo, etc. This one here is an excellent option. Apple ProRes 422 LT. Bit of a mouthful, but try and remember the LT bit at the end. Another good format and preset combination is H.264, which creates an MP4 video file. And then in the presets, a lot more to choose from. We've got specific ones for YouTube at different resolutions. So either 1080p or 720p would be good choices. The same for the Vimeo options. These high quality 1080p, high quality 720p are good options. And the Twitter 1080p Full HD option is also very good. If we choose the YouTube one for now, we're going to go for the 1080 Full HD one. And if we come down to the bottom of the export settings window, estimated file size 92 megabytes. If we go and choose that Twitter 1080p Full HD preset, you can see that it's compressed even further, and we can get our file size down to an incredibly small 12 megabytes. Underneath our format and presets, we've got our output name. So this is asking us where we're saving it to. This is the location. So at the moment it's just named it after our sequence and one of our clips in our edit. So we'd click into this blue text here, and then it gives us the ability to name our film, and we can name that whatever we wish, and then where we can save our work. So there will be a drop down with some limited options, and then if we hit this arrow here, we can be more precise, maybe even make a new folder, which we can call exports, or whatever we wish. Save, and we can now see the name of the short film and that file extension. So because it's a H.264 file, there's that .mp4 extension at the end. If we choose a different format, then we get a different file extension, .mov or MOV as it's sometimes referred to. You'll notice that when we change to the QuickTime format and presets, we lose that estimated file size. So it's definitely going to be higher in megabytes than we had with the MP4 files, but at the minute we're not going to know what it is until the export is finished. Comments, this is up to you, whether you wanted to put anything in there. These two are always selected by default, export video, export audio, but do watch out, sometimes these things can get turned off. At least one of these must be selected, of course, and we want both, and you always do. We've got a summary of technical information about the video. If we scroll down here, we're given the pixel dimensions of the video. So we know we want it to be a 1080 full HD video, and this is telling us the pixel dimensions, 1080 by 1920. We're able to change those if we wish, but I wouldn't advise it because it will start to damage the aspect ratio, the 16 by 9 aspect ratio of our video. Frame rate options, so we can try and change our frame rate. I recommend leaving your frame rate as the same as your sequence. In fact, we can leave most of these options as we find them. One that you may want to change is bitrate encoding and this little drop down. And the only thing to bear in mind here is that if we change it from 1 pass to 2 pass, we're going to get a better video at the end of it. Processing of the export takes a little bit longer, and it's the computer putting more time into our export, giving us a better quality product. So down towards the bottom, use maximum render quality, tick. Use previews, we'll tick that. Then down at the bottom we've got a few buttons. Metadata we'll ignore. Queue and export. Now queue is always highlighted. If we choose queue now, it will open another program called Adobe Media Encoder, and that program will handle the export. This can be quite good if we want to go back into our edit program and perhaps make another version of our edit while our original is exporting. But for now we won't need to do that, and so we'll choose export and let Premiere Pro handle the export of our file. We'll get a percentage bar and our video will export. Depending on the duration and complexity of our edit, the longer the export will take. We're then able to open up our export in a media player, whether it be QuickTime or VLC, and we can play that back to check for quality, to make sure that the video and the audio have exported properly, that we don't have any problems with lip sync, missing sound, missing effects or titles that we may have put onto our edit. And before handing anything over for submission or upload, I do recommend that you view the work back yourself, make sure that you're happy with it before handing it over. We hope that you found this editing tutorial helpful, and that you'll join us for further tutorials in the future. See you next time.